I never thought my own family would betray me like this. My name is Alyssa Morgan. I'm 24 years old. For years, I carried them financially, emotionally believing my love and loyalty would be enough. But when their business began to fail, they turned on me, accusing me of destroying everything they built. They erased my sacrifices, twisted my help into blame, and cast me out. But what they didn't know was, I had prepared. This isn't just a story, it's my reckoning. Stay until the end, and share your story below if you've ever faced betrayal from those closest to you. The night they called the family meeting, I should have known. The air felt heavier than usual, like even the walls of my childhood home were bracing for what was coming. The living room, once filled with the quiet warmth of holidays and Sunday evenings, now felt cold and staged. Every seat was taken. My parents sat on the old floral sofa. My sister Brianna was right beside them, arms folded, lips tight. Even a few extended relatives were there, sitting upright like silent witnesses to something I hadn't yet been accused of. I stood near the doorway, holding my breath. My father, Walter, cleared his throat. His voice was steady, but his eyes couldn't meet mine. "Alyssa," he began, "we need to have a serious talk about the situation you've put this family in." The words stung. Even though part of me had prepared for this, I stayed quiet, letting him continue, even as my stomach tightened. "We've worked hard for decades to build Anderson Woodworks," he said, his voice rising slightly. "This business has been part of this town for generations, but ever since you started making changes, well, the business is struggling like never before." I heard my mother sniff quietly, but she didn't look at me. Brianna sat stiff, her face filled with something between satisfaction and self-righteousness. I could almost feel the years of quiet jealousy radiating from her. I swallowed and spoke as calmly as I could. "I modernized the marketing. I built your website, managed your online store, ran targeted campaigns. I never made decisions without your approval. The numbers show sales have increased." But my father shook his head sharply. Numbers don't matter when customers stop trusting us. You brought in the wrong kind of buyers. You made us look cheap to our loyal customers. This isn't how our family does business." It was like watching a play I'd seen before. Blame handed out like candy. Facts dismissed if they didn't fit the story they wanted to believe. Brianna leaned forward then, her voice cutting. "And you pushed Dad into that refinancing loan. You told us it was the only way." I could feel my hands starting to shake, but I forced myself to keep my voice steady. "I warned you about that loan. I insisted on conditions to protect myself and all of you. You signed those agreements. You agreed to every term." The room grew tense. I saw my grandfather glance down, uncomfortable, but no one else spoke. My father's face flushed with anger. "You held your precious credit score over our heads. You made demands. We didn't have a choice." "You always had a choice," I whispered, but it didn't matter. They had come here not to talk, but to assign guilt. And they had already made their choice. My mother finally looked up, her voice soft, but it cut me even deeper. "Alyssa, sweetheart, sometimes you act like you're the only one who's ever sacrificed for this family. We all have. You don't understand what your father has carried on his shoulders." That was the pattern. Every time I tried to speak up, I was told I was ungrateful, that I was dramatic, that I was too sensitive. For years, I believed them, but not tonight. I took a slow breath, remembering everything Dr. Miles had taught me. The sessions where I had unlearned the need to carry guilt that was never mine. The quiet, painful work of building boundaries when every part of me had been trained to break for them. I pulled out the folder I had brought with me, placing it gently on the coffee table. Inside were copies of the financial records, the signed agreements, the documented communications, my safety net. I looked at my father, my voice softer now. "This isn't fair, Dad. I've done everything I could to help. I offered my time, my skills, my money. But I cannot keep carrying the weight of choices that were never mine." Brianna scoffed loudly. "You just want to see us fail. Admit it. You're jealous because you were never part of the real business." The words didn't even surprise me anymore. I had heard so many versions of them through the years, that I was too ambitious, that I was trying to control everything, that I was difficult. But the truth was simpler. I was no longer willing to be their scapegoat. My father's voice cracked now, desperate and cold. "Well, congratulations. Alyssa, the bank is about to foreclose. We could lose the house. Your mother might be out on the street. But I hope you're proud." I felt my chest tighten, but I didn't let my voice waver. "I warned you what would happen if the conditions were broken," I said quietly. "And now you're trying to make me the villain because you didn't listen." My mother's voice, barely above a whisper, came next. "I think it's best if you leave now." I stood there for a moment, looking at each of them, my sister glaring, my parents avoiding my eyes, my grandfather staring at his hands. They had already erased me. I picked up my purse and turned to the door. My voice was soft, but steady. "I hope someday you see how much you've lost." And then I walked out. No one stopped me. No one called my name. Outside, the cool Savannah night air hit my face. The stars looked distant, like quiet witnesses to something they'd seen far too many times. As I drove away, my phone buzzed. The first of many missed calls that would come, but I didn't answer, because this time, I was done. The days after I left felt strange. The house I had grown up in was still there, just a few miles away, but it might as well have been on another planet. My phone rang nonstop for the first 3 days. My mother called the most, then Brianna. Even a few cousins I hadn't heard from in years suddenly found my number, leaving carefully worded messages that danced around what had happened. None of them apologized. None of them asked if I was okay. They all said the same thing in different ways. "Come home. Make this right. Help your family." But I didn't pick up. Not once. Instead, I sat in my apartment and pulled out the folder again, the same one I had placed on the coffee table before walking out. The evidence was all there. The signed agreements, the bank statements, the detailed timeline of when the business debts began long before I ever stepped in. I flipped through every page, as if touching the paper could steady my nerves. This wasn't revenge. This was protection. I called my attorney, Ms. Whitaker, that Monday morning. She greeted me with her usual calm, measured voice. "Alyssa, I was expecting your call." I didn't need to explain much. She already knew the history. I had been preparing these documents for months, long before the family meeting, long before I truly believed I might need them. I had started gathering everything after my father began withdrawing large sums from the business accounts without proper documentation. My instincts told me to be ready, and now I was. "The business loan you co-signed is going into default, Ms. Whitaker said gently, "but we'll act quickly. I'll file for legal separation of responsibility based on breach of contract. Your conditions were clearly outlined. They violated them. That protects you." Her voice made it sound simple, but I knew it wasn't. Nothing about this was simple. I exhaled slowly, staring out the window. Thank you. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. Later that afternoon, Brianna texted again. The message was short, bitter. We know you're doing this on purpose. I put the phone down and walked away. I wasn't doing this on purpose. I was doing this because I finally understood that rescuing people who never wanted to save themselves was not love. It was surrender. And I was done surrendering. The days turned into weeks. The business, once held together by duct tape and denial, began to fall apart without my support. Customers who used to trust the Anderson name were now pulling orders. Vendors were growing nervous. Rumors started swirling through Savannah's tight community. My father's gambling, which had always been the family's whispered secret, was now being openly discussed in back rooms and at church gatherings. People I barely knew began approaching me at the grocery store, offering quiet sympathy. I always wondered how you put up with it for so long, one woman said, her voice low, as she stood beside me in the produce aisle. I nodded politely but said nothing. What was there to say? Meanwhile, my own life took a turn I hadn't expected. Veronica, my supervisor at the marketing firm, called me into her office one morning. She smiled as I sat down. Alyssa, I've been watching how you've handled this situation not just personally, but professionally. You've managed your projects flawlessly, even with everything going on. I tried to wave it off, but she continued. We're expanding. We need someone to lead the new regional branch in Charleston. You'd have full authority to build the team. The position is yours if you want it. For a moment, I just stared at her. After everything that had crumbled behind me, here was something solid, something mine. I'd be honored, I finally said, my voice trembling slightly. As I left her office, I felt something loosen inside me, like a weight I had carried for far too long was starting to lift. That night, I sat on my small balcony, the cool Georgia air brushing against my skin. I thought about my father's words. You've ruined us. You've destroyed everything. And yet, here I was, still standing, still breathing. 3 days later, Brianna called again. This time, I answered. Her voice was sharp, but there was something brittle beneath it. Dad says the bank is threatening foreclosure on the house. If you don't step in, we'll lose everything. Mom's been crying for days. I closed my eyes. I could almost picture my mother sitting at the kitchen table, hands wringing her favorite dish towel, looking out the window like the answers were hiding in the yard. I'm sorry, I said softly, but firmly. I can't fix this. Brianna's voice turned hard. You think this makes you better than us? No, I whispered. It makes me free. She hung up without another word. As I sat there, listening to the silence, I realized something. They weren't calling because they wanted me back. They were calling because they wanted my resources, my money, my credit, my willingness to sacrifice. But they had never wanted me. And now, finally, they couldn't have either. The weeks that followed were strange, not quiet, never quiet, but different. The calls stopped for a while, as if they had finally realized I meant what I said. The silence wasn't peace, though. It was more like the still air before a heavy storm. My family had always operated in cycles: rage, guilt, silence, then manipulation. I knew another wave would come. But for now, the stillness was its own kind of mercy. The business began to unravel faster than even I expected. Without my marketing efforts, the online orders dried up within a month. Vendors pulled out, refusing further shipments until balances were paid. Rumors spread that my father was defaulting on payments and that several customers had filed complaints over undelivered items. It was all happening out in the open now, no more hiding behind closed doors. Savannah isn't a big place. Not really. People talk. Word traveled quickly. My family's once carefully polished reputation began to crack. At the grocery store. An older man who used to work with my grandfather nodded at me gently as I passed. His voice was quiet, but his words were full. "You did all you could, sweetheart. Some folks only see the truth when it's too late." I managed a small smile. There wasn't much left to say. While my family's world unraveled, mine was slowly being rebuilt, piece by piece. The offer in Charleston had become more than just a promotion. It was a fresh start. I packed my things and settled into a small apartment on the edge of the city, not far from the water. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't have to decorate a single room with anyone else's approval in mind. Every piece of furniture, every curtain, every photo on the wall belonged to this new version of me. Not the daughter desperate to please, not the sister who was never quite enough, but me, alone, free. In the early mornings before work, I'd sit on the balcony with my coffee, listening to the soft hum of the city waking up. The birds, the distant traffic, the light breeze through the trees, it all felt like quiet applause for simply surviving. But the calls returned. Brianna was the first. As always. This time, though, her voice was softer, almost sweet. "Alyssa, Mom's been sick lately. The stress is taking a toll on her. She's not sleeping. She barely eats. If you would just come home, even for a little while, it would mean the world to her." The guilt was heavy in every word. It used to work on me. It used to pull me back. I stared at the phone before answering. My voice calm. "I'm sorry she's struggling. I hope she gets the care she needs, but I can't come back." Brianna's tone shifted immediately, the sweetness evaporating. "You're unbelievable. After everything we've done for you," that old familiar phrase, "after everything we've done for you," I could hear the edge in her voice sharpen. "You think you're better than us now. You always wanted to leave. You always thought you were too good for this family." I let her words sit there. I had no interest in arguing, not anymore. "Goodbye, Brianna," I said softly, and hung up. The next few days were quiet again. Then my phone buzzed with a text, this time from an unknown number, but I knew who it was. The message was short, cold, full of my father's sharpness. "The house is gone. The business is gone. Congratulations." I read it several times, feeling nothing. Not triumph, not sorrow, just emptiness. It wasn't until later that evening, sitting alone in my apartment, that the weight of it hit me. The house where I grew up, the walls that held years of birthdays, Christmas mornings, Sunday dinners, gone. Not because I had failed them, but because they had refused to face the truth when it mattered. And yet, as painful as it was, I felt something else, too. Relief. The storm had finally broken. In the following weeks, I settled deeper into my work. My team in Charleston grew quickly. I met people who respected my ideas, who valued my leadership. I was no longer just someone's daughter or someone's sister. I was Alyssa Morgan, director of a growing firm. My name stood on its own. Veronica visited one afternoon for a quarterly review. After the meeting, as we walked through the office together, she paused and looked at me closely. "You seem lighter," she said. "I don't know what you left behind, Alyssa, but I'm glad you did." Her words stayed with me for days. At night, I often found myself staring at a small framed article I'd hung on my wall. It was a simple feature from a local business journal, highlighting my promotion and the success of our expansion. The headline was plain, but to me, it was everything. Young director leads new growth in Charleston. It wasn't about recognition. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about finally seeing myself for who I had become. One evening, I stood in front of that frame, running my fingers lightly across the glass. My reflection stared back, tired. Yes, but steady. Strong. For the first time in years, I whispered aloud, "You made it." And I believed it. By the end of summer, the collapse was complete. Anderson Woodworks no longer existed. The building that had once held my grandfather's pride and my father's obsession stood empty, its windows boarded, the old wooden sign cracked and faded in the harsh Savannah sun. I had driven past it once, only once, on my way to visit a client outside the city. I didn't stop, I didn't even slow down. But for a brief moment, I glanced at the hollow shell of what used to be, and I felt no bitterness, only quiet. The business had finally failed in full view of the town. The debts were too heavy, the truth too loud to hide any longer. After years of denial and whispered cover-ups, the family's secret was now public knowledge. My father's gambling, the mounting loans, the dishonest bookkeeping, the desperate borrowing under my name. It was all out there, exposed like raw nerve. Word spread beyond Savannah. A few local newspapers even ran small articles about the bankruptcy filings and criminal investigations. Vendors who were owed money came forward. Former employees quietly spoke about missed paychecks and false promises. The foreclosure on the house followed soon after. I heard about it first through an email from Ms. Whitaker, my attorney. She had kept me informed throughout the legal proceedings, ensuring my name was fully protected from the wreckage. Her message was simple. The bank has completed seizure of the property. You have no further liability. It was over. The family home was auctioned off, stripped of the memories I once thought would last forever. The same living room where I had stood to face my family that night was now emptied, its silence belonging to strangers. Meanwhile, my father and mother were forced to move into a small rented apartment on the far edge of town, a place far removed from the life they had worked so hard to project. The pride that once defined them had crumbled into something smaller, humbler, though not necessarily wiser. Brianna and Josh didn't last long after that. His business schemes unraveled almost as quickly as the family store. Debt collectors circled him like vultures, and not long after, he left, quietly, without warning, out. Brianna was left behind, bitter and angrier than ever, her text messages to me turning from accusations to desperate pleas, and finally, to silence. But I answered none of them. In Charleston, my world kept expanding. The new office thrived. We secured 2 large accounts that stabilized our growth for years to come. My team was strong, loyal, and respected my leadership without question. There were no guilt trips here, no manipulations, just work and trust and the simple joy of building something honest. Evenings were my time. I'd sit on my balcony, a cup of tea warming my hands, the low hum of the city comforting me in ways Savannah never could. The air was different here, lighter, free from the heaviness of old expectations. I no longer carried their stories on my back. I had put them down. Then one afternoon, as I returned home from a meeting, I saw an unfamiliar number flash on my phone. For a moment, I almost ignored it. But something told me to answer. It was my mother. Her voice was thinner than I remembered, weaker. Life had softened her edges, but not completely. "Alyssa," she said, her voice breaking slightly. I didn't know if you'd pick up." I said nothing, waiting. "I'm coming to Charleston next week. For medical tests. She paused. I was wondering if you might meet me for coffee. There was no demand in her voice this time. No guilt. Just a kind of quiet hesitation I'd never heard from her before. I spoke softly. I'll meet you. The following week, we sat across from each other at a small cafe not far from my apartment. She looked smaller somehow. Her once perfectly styled hair was grayer, her hands more fragile. The years had carved their weight into her face. You look well, she said, trying to smile. I am, I replied simply. For a while, neither of us spoke. We sipped our coffee, the silence more peaceful than strained, and then, softly, she spoke again. I've had a lot of time to think. I waited. We didn't treat you right, she whispered. We used you, all of us. And when you wouldn't bend anymore, we broke everything around you. Her eyes filled with tears, but she kept her voice steady. I blamed you because it was easier than facing your father's choices, and my own. I sat very still, letting her words settle. It wasn't your job to save us, Alyssa, she continued. I see that now. I nodded slowly. No, it wasn't. I don't expect anything from you, she whispered. I just needed to say it. For the first time in my life, my mother spoke words that weren't meant to control or to shame. There was no performance, no careful rehearsed lines, just the raw, stripped-down truth. And though it wasn't an apology in full, it was enough. We parted with a simple, quiet understanding. I didn't invite her into my life, but I didn't shut the door entirely either. It was enough for now. That night, I returned home, sat in my armchair beneath the framed article on my wall, and breathed deeply. The chapter was closing, not with rage or vengeance, but with peace. And that, I realized, was the real victory. The months that followed were quiet, but not empty, not like before. This kind of quiet carried no weight, no anxiety pressing on my chest every time the phone rang. It was just life. The simple rhythm of days unfolding without crisis or confrontation. I'd settled fully into my new life in Charleston. My apartment finally felt like home. The framed article still hung above my desk, not as a trophy, but as a quiet reminder of what it took to get here. The little pottery vase on the table, one I had made during a community art class, held fresh daisies I bought each weekend from the farmer's market. My space reflected something I never thought I'd truly know: peace. There were still occasional messages from my mother. Short ones. Thoughtful. Sometimes awkward, but never manipulative. She would send a quick note on holidays or after her doctor's appointments, never asking for anything, only sharing, and I responded carefully. But without the walls I used to build so high, it was the closest thing to a healthy connection we had ever known. My father, however, remained silent. The last message I received from him was months ago, buried in the cold anger of blame. I had no desire to reach back. His absence became its own form of closure. Brianna faded into the background. After her husband disappeared, her texts turned more desperate. But I answered none of them. She tried to guilt me, then threaten, then beg, but eventually, when her words stopped having power, she stopped sending them altogether. One Sunday afternoon, as autumn painted Charleston in warm golds, I found myself sitting at a small overlook, staring out across the water. The waves rolled in slow and steady, like soft breaths. I had walked a long road to get here, one I never imagined I'd survive with my soul intact. But I had. As I watched the sunlight dance across the water, Jessica sat down beside me. She had become one of my closest friends since I arrived, a soft-spoken woman with her own scars, her own family wounds. We'd met through a support group for adult children from toxic families. In many ways, our stories were different. But the pain always shared the same language. "You've come so far, Alyssa," she said softly. I smiled, still watching the waves. Some days, I don't even recognize the person I used to be. She nodded. That's healing. It doesn't erase what happened, but it makes space for who you're becoming. Her words stayed with me long after we parted ways that evening. 2 weeks later, I stood once again at my desk in the office. Our team had landed another major client. The expansion was solid. My name was no longer a whispered footnote behind my family's shadow. It stood firmly on its own. As the team celebrated in the conference room, Veronica pulled me aside briefly, her expression kind. "Do you realize what you've done here?" she asked. I smiled gently. "It still feels surreal some days." She shook her head. "You didn't just build a branch office. You rebuilt yourself." Her words hit something deep inside me, not because I hadn't known it, but because hearing it aloud made it real. I left the office that evening as the sun dipped low, casting a warm amber glow over the streets of Charleston. The air smelled of salt water and wood smoke. I walked slowly, taking in the stillness. My steps didn't carry the weight they once had. My shoulders no longer curled inward, waiting for the next emotional blow. I was standing tall. Later that night, as I prepared for bed, my phone buzzed once more. It was my mother. A simple message. "Thinking of you today. Hope you're well." I read it, quietly absorbing the softness behind those few words. And then I typed back, "I am. Thank you. I hope you're well too." I set the phone down without dread, without heaviness, just a quiet breath of closure. As I turned off the lights, I glanced one last time at the frame on my wall, the one that had traveled with me through this journey. The headline was simple, but its meaning ran deep. Young director leads new growth. But now, I finally saw the words that had always been hiding underneath. Alyssa Morgan. Free. The past would always be there. The scars wouldn't disappear. But they no longer controlled me. I had written a new chapter, a life no longer dictated by blame or guilt or obligation. A life shaped by boundaries, by truth, by resilience. For years, I had lived as the family scapegoat. I carried the weight of their failures, their shame, their unspoken wounds. I bent until I nearly broke. But one day, I stood up straight, and I kept standing. If you've ever been there, if you've ever had to walk away from people who only loved you when you served their needs, I want you to know something. It's not selfish to choose peace. It's not cruel to protect your heart. Sometimes, the greatest act of love is the one you give yourself. Because healing isn't about who stays or who leaves. It's about finally choosing yourself,